This message comes from Mint Mobile. Starting at $15 a month, make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. $45 upfront payment for 3 months. 5 gigabyte plan equivalent to $15 a month. Taxes and fees extra. First 3 months only. See terms.
What's good, y'all? It's Gene. And before we get to the show today, I want to talk for a minute about public media, which maybe you've possibly heard about in the news a few times this year. So Code Switch, of course, is public media. It's a big part of what makes our show and all of the podcasts you love from NPR so unique. Public media is made for you to enrich your understanding of the world and to enrich your life. But as of this fall, federal funding for public media, including NPR and local NPR stations, has been completely eliminated. And so we're moving into this uncharted future together, and we're relying on your support to keep bringing you episodes of Code Switch. I mean, it's been such a privilege this year to bring you all kinds of intimate, messy, and deeply reported stories and conversations that put the news in context. You know, stories about who free speech is really for, and about how undocumented families are navigating the looming threat of ICE, and about what's bringing you joy, about black banjo players and tribal colleges and protests and voting rights. And we cannot wait to see what we get into together next year in 2026. So if you're already an NPR Plus supporter, we see you, we appreciate you, thank you for rocking with us. But if not, then what you waiting for? You can join the NPR Plus community and get a bunch of perks like bonus episodes and more from across NPR's giant slate of podcasts. And you get to support public media by signing up for NPR Plus today at plus.npr.org. All right, cool. On with the show. Just a heads up, listeners. This episode is going to contain some salty language, which means it's finna be some cussing. What's good? You're listening to Code Switch. I'm Gene Demby. And friends, I want to take you back in time a little bit. Maybe not a little bit, like more than a decade ago, to one of the very, very first conversations we ever had on Code Switch as a team. It was way back in 2014, and the conversation was about whether we, as a team, should use the word racist in our reporting. And I know what you're thinking, like, what? This is a show about race and identity and power. Like, how are we going to get around using the word racist? Like, that's kind of a bananas assertion. But our editor at the time, Matt Thompson, shout out to Matt, was making the argument to me that racist had become such a broad descriptor that it wasn't always really that useful for our purposes. Like, if chattel slavery is racist and the genocide of indigenous people is racist, but also mispronouncing someone's name is racist and touching someone's hair is racist, what does that descriptor really tell us? Like, is it giving our listeners and our readers any helpful information for the thing we're talking about? Like, wouldn't we be better off, just for the sake of clarity, giving our listeners more specific language? And there was a lot of disagreement in this conversation, as you might imagine, because racism isn't just a descriptor of power relationships, right? It also carries with it a moral weight. So calling something, say, racial discrimination in home loans does not really carry that same kind of charge to it. And so when listeners and commenters want us to use the word racism, sometimes when we want to use it, it's out of a desire to assign that moral heft to the thing we're reporting on. That conversation happened a nice minute ago, but these days I feel like we're still wrestling more than ever with that question because, I mean, this current presidential administration, they've provided a lot of fodder. Like, just this year, we have reported on how the president has been trying to completely overhaul our immigration system to kick people out of the country who are here legally, as well as undocumented people who are here. Also this year, Trump has flirted with undoing birthright citizenship for children born in the United States to immigrants, and flirted with denaturalizing people who have gone through the process of becoming American citizens. As of last week, the president announced he will permanently pause all migration from third world countries. Third world countries is the administration's language. This announcement came after an Afghan national shot 2 members of the National Guard who were deployed to Washington, D.C. There are currently 19 countries on his list, including Sudan, Venezuela, and of course, Afghanistan. I'm not going to list them all, but Trump took the opportunity after that shooting to express his skepticism about immigrants once more. At first, it was immigrants from Afghanistan. Then it focused in on Somalis, which gave the president a chance to renew his long-standing beef with Ilhan Omar, who is a Democratic congresswoman from Minnesota and who is also a Somali immigrant herself.
In a ramble that went on for several minutes on Wednesday, the president talked about Somalis as a group, including many citizens who employ him. Trump also talked about deporting Omar, a U.S. citizen who is a member of Congress. In the middle of his discussion, he threw in a mention of former President Obama, although Trump did not say what he thought Obama and Somalis might have in common. He was following up on Tuesday's ramble when he discussed Somalis and others convicted of defrauding social service programs in Minnesota.
We're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. Her friends are garbage. These aren't people that work. These aren't people that say, let's go, come on, let's make this place great.
None of this rhetoric is novel for Trump, as we know. Like last year, during the presidential campaign, Trump was repeating this ridiculous lie that Haitian immigrants were eating people's dogs. Y'all remember that, right? The rhetoric that he uses and the policy that often comes out of that rhetoric is kind of just how President Trump gets down. We know that by now. I mean, in his first go-round as a candidate and as president, he was batting his eyes at proud white nationalists and white supremacists. He was copping pleas for the demonstrators chanting anti-Semitic phrases at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia.
But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides.
Remember back then, he was training the country's immigration apparatus on denying access to people from the global south, particularly people from majority Muslim countries.
Is it a Muslim ban?
Totally. It's not a Muslim ban, but we're totally prepared. It's working out very nicely. You see it at the airports. You see it all over. It's working out very nicely. And we're going to have a very, very strict ban, and we're going to have extreme vetting, which we should have had in this country for many years. Thank you, everybody.
So back then, during his first administration, media outlets often stopped short of calling his language and the policies that came from it racist, even though for a lot of people, it was plainly racist. Some of that on the media side is a kind of institutional deference to the office of the presidency, right? But also, a lot of people in the American public clearly agree with President Trump. And so journalists calling his statements and stances racist, a descriptor that is freighted with moral meaning, even as Americans increasingly can't agree on what racism is, that could seem to news outlets like taking sides, putting our media thumbs on the partisan scale. So what do we in the news media, so used to covering politics as these partisan controversies while remaining objective ourselves, I hope you can hear my air quotes, what do we do when policies and talking points rooted in white nationalism start showing up in everyday mainstream political discourse? During that first Trump presidency, we being the team that works on Code Switch, but quite a few other folks here at NPR, we're often bristling at or confounded by our newsroom guidance on covering the Trump White House on issues of race. And so we asked some of the people who helped shape how NPR reports about how and why and whether we should call something racist, particularly when the stuff we're talking about comes directly from the White House. And so we're revisiting that combo today. And the voices you're going to hear in that conversation, my old co-host Shereen Marisol Meraji, Keith Woods, NPR's VP of Diversity and Training, Mark Memmott, who was NPR Standards Editor, have all since moved on from our newsroom. Our new Standards Editor, by the way, is Tony Cavan. But the circumstances that brought about that combo are weirdly, eerily similar to what's happening right now, down to the verbiage the president uses. And so we thought it was important because we, both at NPR and in journalism more broadly, still ain't figured out how to talk about the specific challenges of covering Trump and the specific use of calling something racist. All right, here's Shereen.
This message comes from Whole Foods Market. Make every holiday party shine with Whole Foods Market. Hosting? Stock up on their Wallet Happy 365 brand with appetizers like walnut honey shrimp and breaded calamari. Plus, save now on crowd-pleasing bone-in spiral-cut ham with no antibiotics ever. For dessert, check out limited-time treats like their holiday rum cake. With so many ways to save on festive spreads all month long, shop Whole Foods Market today. Terms apply.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. At Mint Mobile, their favorite word is no. No contracts, no monthly bills, no hidden fees. Plans start at $15 a month. Make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. That's mintmobile.com/switch. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5GB plan required. Equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Recorded Future. Every day, millions of cyber threats compete for attention, but only a few truly matter to your business. As a leading threat intelligence company, Recorded Future cuts through the noise with precision intelligence. That's why top banks and governments trust them, because security leaders don't just react. They foresee, spotting the signals that others miss, and acting before threats become setbacks. Recorded Future. Know what matters. Act first.
Why don't you go back to where you came from? I've heard that one a few times. It's so uninspired. It's so played and so racist. But as a journalist, I've been trained to be very wary when it comes to using the R word, racist, in my stories.
House Democrats are expected to take up a resolution today condemning President Trump's recent racist remarks.
Wait, did you just hear what I heard?
President Trump's recent racist remarks.
That's NPR newscaster Lakshmi Singh using the R word to describe President Trump's tweet directed at 4 Congress members of color. You know the one. The one where he tweeted they should, quote, go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came, unquote. Interesting. Because if you heard the conversation we had in our episode from January 2018, the R word in the age of Trump, NPR's Standards and Practices editor Mark Memmott told us why NPR journalists didn't use racist when it came to the president's other comments. You know, shithole countries, and there's a long list.
We don't tell people what to think. We give them the information they need to decide what they think.
Stick to the facts, give listeners context, and they can decide for themselves if things are racist or not. Well, we've invited Mark back on the show to tell us why we're using racist in this instance. And this time he's joined by Keith Woods, NPR's Senior Vice President of Newsroom Training and Diversity. According to NPR's Ethics Handbook, Mark is responsible for cultivating an ethical culture here at NPR News. And Keith Woods is Vice President of Newsroom Training and Diversity at NPR. He heads up NPR's diversity strategy and is co-editor of The Authentic Voice, the best reporting on race and ethnicity. Hi, Mark.
Hello.
Hi, Keith.
Hi, Cherie.
Welcome back to Code Switch to both of you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
All right, I think we've all heard by now that President Trump tweeted that certain members of Congress should, quote, go back and help fix the totally broken and crime-infested places from which they came, unquote. And we can add this to the president's list of incendiary, racially charged, racially tinged, racially loaded language specifically aimed at people of color. Or can I just say racist? Mark?
Well, we have come to the conclusion in the newsroom that what the president tweeted was racist language. So you could say that.
Okay, racist language. And refresh our memory, Mark, what is our policy around using the word racist?
We use it when it fits. That's what I told Code Switch in January 2018. That's the way we still feel. In other words, we take each case on its own and talk over what's happened, what's been said, what's been written, what's been tweeted. It's a heavy word. It's not one that we use on very many occasions. We use it sparingly. In fact, this is one of the first times we've used it in this context.
What was different about this context? Because, you know, he's said many other things before. There's a list. The last time we had you on, he allegedly called certain African nations shithole countries, as well as Haiti.
I think the difference this time was it was a tweet aimed at 4 specific individuals, 4 women of color, using a old racist trope, you know, go back to your home country, very blatantly. And we wanted just to be clear that it wasn't just racially charged, racially inflamed, whatever. We wanted to make clear that that is an old racist phrase that was reused.
And Keith, you actually disagree with this decision. Can you tell us why?
I do, and I say that if you were applying the standards that we applied to what the president said Sunday, I can't think of how many times we ought to have referred to the language as racist using that standard. And my overall problem is that we don't really have a standard. Even what Mark articulated just now is very specific to this event, and I don't know. I mean, if we had a policy that said when the thing is directed at specific human beings who are people of color, and it borrows from an old racist trope that's the moment that we call it racist, I could live with a policy that said something as specific as that. But journalism has been both the perpetrator of racist language itself and covered matters of race that could have easily been called racist by my standards of racism for decades. I think that the problem here is that words like racist come with human judgment. They're not just descriptive. There's a moral judgment that sits behind them. And we do not, as a society or as a medium, apply them evenly or with any logic at all. And I'm not arguing this because we're inconsistent. I'm arguing this because we sit on a very fragile credibility as a profession, different from every other profession out there. And that credibility rests in part on the view of the public that we are maintaining some distance, our judgments, our morals, some distance from the things that we're covering.
Mark, this idea of using racist as moral judgment, or the fact that the audience will assume that we are making a moral judgment by using the term racist, rather than using the term racist as a way to describe a pattern of harm inflicted on a group of people. Did you take that into consideration when the NPR news leadership made the decision to use racist in this case?
Yes, we certainly do factor in all those things, and we also factor in everything that Keith just talked about as well, that journalists are very uncomfortable sometimes in making these kinds of judgments. That said, editors are humans who make judgments all the time. We judge whether language might be offensive. We judge whether the sounds that you may hear on the radio are disturbing, and we warn audiences about them. And we try to be factual when we reach the conclusions about such language. And this was a case where, we weighed all those things, and I would just suggest that it isn't necessarily a moral judgment to identify that this language mirrors or echoes, or whichever word we want to use, a racist trope.
I don't see why journalists in the leads and headlines of their stories have to be the ones to call it that. And I'll just make this point, Shireen. Mm-hmm. I watch the news and listen to the news, and I read the Twitterverse every day. I think there are some pathetic things that are tweeted out. I think there are some despicable things that are tweeted out. Why shouldn't I be able to say those things, given this standard? I think it's all based on judgment. The president said something. Our job is to tell people that he said it. Some people thought immediately that the thing he said was racist. Our job is to tell them that people thought it was racist. Some people found that it was racism based on some contextual history, and we ought to tell them that. We can do all of those things including putting the word racist in a headline in quotation marks because somebody else used it, and not have to be the ones who have made the judgment.
And I would make the case, and I agree with everything that you said, that we should only do it when the rarest occasions when we've reached the conclusion based on the evidence and the context that we have marshaled and all those things that you just mentioned, that it adds up to, in this case, racist language. Not that we're saying the president himself is a racist, but that the language he used.
I would ask, I would ask if we looked at some of the utterances of members of Congress, some of the utterances of current candidates for the Democratic nomination, we could find even less ambiguous language, or at least equally tied to racist tropes in the past that we have opted not to call racist.
I agree. I go back to an old-fashioned newsroom concept, though, that when the President of the United States says something, states something, writes something, that's different.
News. That's
it's
news.
Big news.
Sure.
Coming up,
The urge that we have now, which I believe is motivated by our desire to hit back, to label things and people racist, in the end is a slope that we will slide down so fast and damage the instrument of journalism, which is one of the few instruments we have to fight exactly this kind of thing.
This message comes from Jerry. Noticing your car insurance rate creep up even without tickets or claims? You're not alone. That's why there's Jerry. Jerry handles the legwork by comparing quotes side by side from over 50 top insurers, so you can confidently hit buy. No spam calls, no hidden fees. Jerry even tracks rates and alerts you when it's best to shop. Drivers who save with Jerry could save over $1,300 a year. Don't overpay. Download the Jerry app or visit jerry.ai/NPR today. Support for NPR and the following message come from 20th Century Studios with Ella McKay, a new comedy from Academy Award-winning writer-director James L. Brooks. An idealistic young woman juggles her family and work life in a story about the people you love and how to survive them. Featuring an all-star cast, including Emma Mackey, Jamie Lee Curtis, Jack Lowden, Kumail Nanjiani, Ayo Edebiri, Spike Fern, Julie Kavner, with Albert Brooks and Woody Harrelson. See Ella McKay, only in theaters this Friday. Get tickets now.
This message comes from Viking, committed to exploring the world in comfort. Journey through the heart of Europe on an elegant Viking longship with thoughtful service, destination-focused dining, and cultural enrichment on board and on shore. And every Viking voyage is all-inclusive with no children and no casinos. Discover more at Viking.com.
Gene this week, Code Switch. We are revisiting a conversation my former co-host Shireen Marisol Meraji had during the first Trump administration. It was about how we at NPR use or don't use the word racist to cover President Trump's rhetoric and his policies. Okay, here's Shireen again.
Look, as journalists, we've labeled the Jim Crow era as racist. We've referred to blackface as racist. We've called slavery a racist institution. So I'm wondering if 50 years from now, journalists are going to look back at all of this and call these remarks racist, and it will be nothing.
Well, in the news cycle, it'll be 50 minutes from now. But I think, like everything else in the language that we deploy journalistically, there are places where there is no ambiguity. Each of these pieces of language that we use both come with consequence and a demand for clarity and the absence of ambiguity. If we can talk about whether slavery wasn't racist, if you really wanted to have a legitimate try to have a legitimate conversation, then let's have that conversation. But I think that the urge that we have now, which I believe is motivated by our desire to hit back, to label things and people racist, in the end is a slope that we will slide down so fast and damage the instrument of journalism, which is one of the few instruments we have to fight exactly this kind of thing.
One thing I would say is that nobody I spoke to in the past 2 days in our newsroom said anything close to wanting to hit back. There was no we need to hit back at the president. There was no
language.
Maybe it's in the back of their minds. I don't know. The discussions we had were about the phrase, how we should characterize it. Did this cross some sort of line versus others?
I just want to step back and talk about what you said about ambiguous, things being ambiguous. I don't know. I mean, are calling African nations and Haiti shithole countries, are calling Mexicans drug dealers and rapists, are, telling 4 congresswomen of color to go back to where they came from. Is that ambiguous as far as being racist is concerned?
None of it is ambiguous by my standards, Shireen. I've been ready to call stuff racist way longer than you and I have sat down and have this conversation. All I'm saying to you is that your line and my line and tonight's night editor's line and tomorrow's day editor's line is going to be all over the place. And I think we are in a place where we're trying now to be the ones, by our own decisions, to label things one way or the other. And I just don't believe that the journalism has demonstrated through the years that it will call some things one way and other things another way based on who's doing the work. I don't trust journalism to get that right.
One thing I would say in response would be that, yes, there may be some in the newsroom who would push to label someone as a racist. There may be many in the newsroom who will say, no, we absolutely positively can't do that. That's why we have editors who are talking through these things, and it's somewhat like, what do they say about the Senate, that it's the saucer that cools the tea or coffee or whatever it is? I can't remember what that expression is. But it's the editors that will be responsible for making sure we don't stray too far from the principles that you're outlining right there.
Yeah. Well, the saucer doesn't cool the tea very often today, and some of that is because things have slipped. Mm-hmm. Practices, standards, decisions, traditions slipped. I'm fighting to try to hold one up next.
As we all are.
Do we care more about Congress people than we do a whole group of people, Mexicans, for example, who were called rapists and drug dealers by the president, when we decide that this particular comment is racist versus the ones that came before?
That's interesting, and the short answer obviously should be no. We don't care more or less about any one particular group of people. Going back to what then new candidate Trump said in 2015, one thing I could just say is it was just so new. I don't think we and other newsrooms were quite prepared to handle that kind of language from a candidate, and weren't quite sure, as we applied our thinking and our standards, where we would come down on it. In retrospect, maybe we should have made a different call.
Well, I'm trying to find the bottom in where are we willing to go with this, right? So part of this assumes that journalism has to have a word before the word tweet in this sentence. And I reject that idea first. But let's talk about policies, Shireen. Let's talk about any number of the policies that the president enacted beginning when he was sworn in January of 2017. If we have the need, journalistically, to put a word in front of any of those policies, because it is accurately capturing the nature of the policy, why don't we have words like xenophobic or homophobic or whatever the phobic or ism is that applies? Do you not think that an objective person looking at some of those policies would conclude reasonably that this was anti-Semitic or that was homophobic or that was xenophobic?
Oh, I would.
Well, then why aren't we fighting that battle too?
Keith, what are the consequences for calling something racist as a journalism organization?
Well, let me answer with a slightly contextualized answer. I'm in this profession because I see it as a vehicle for fighting for some of the things that are most important to me, including racial justice, and maybe beginning with racial justice. I care about the profession for lots of reasons, but that one above all others. And so how it survives, how it thrives, is important to me for those reasons. The stakes to me are about the thriving and surviving of the profession. When journalism loses the credible ability to say that we are dispassionately trying to tell you what happened, taking as much of our judgment out as we can every day, knowing that we're humans and we can't take it all out. When we start losing that battle, we start losing the battle for the credibility that we have as a profession. That's my stakes.
And Mark, what are the consequences for not calling certain things racist?
Obviously, there are moments when journalists have stood up and said, this is not right, or here's what this is. You think about, obviously, Edward R. Murrow. You think about Walter Cronkite. I am not comparing us to those two giants in any way at this point. But there are points when journalists do need to try to very clearly state, this is what this is. Not as an opinion, but as, marshal your facts. Yes, we don't like labels in most cases, but if the label fits, don't shy away from it. Be clear. And I think that also lends to our credibility. I do worry about the same things. The irony here is that Keith and I agree on almost everything in most cases, and I think we agree on almost everything here. We just reached a different conclusion, which I find to be the beauty of journalism.
Once again, that episode you just listened to originally aired in 2019. It was hosted by Shireen Marisol Meraji, and the guests you heard were Keith Woods, who at the time was NPR's vice president of newsroom training and diversity, and not for nothing, but one of the people who helped found Code Switch. He was our editor for a while. And Mark Memmott, who was formerly NPR supervising senior editor for Standards and Practices. And that is our show. You can follow us on Instagram at NPR Code Switch, all one word. If email's more your bag, ours is codeswitch@npr.org. We want to hear from you. And you can subscribe to the podcast on the NPR app or wherever it is you get your podcast. You can also subscribe to the Code Switch newsletter by going to npr.org/Code Switch newsletter. And just a reminder that signing up for Code Switch Plus is a great way to support our show and to support public media. You might have heard we need the help. And you'll get to listen to every episode of our podcast and a bunch of others without sponsor breaks. So please go find out more at plus.npr.org/Code Switch. This original conversation between Shireen and Mark and Keith, it was edited and produced by Leah Donnella and Sammy Yenigan. This episode rerun was produced by Xavier Lopez and Jess Kung. It was edited by Dalia Mortada and Leah Donnella, and our engineer was Kwesi Lee. We'd be remiss if we did not shout out the rest of the Code Switch Massive. That's Christina Kala, Verlin Williams, and B.A. Parker. As for me, I'm Gene Demby. Be easy, y'all.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Rosetta Stone, an expert in language learning for 30 years. Right now, NPR listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership to 25 different languages for 50% off. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR. This message comes from Mint Mobile. At Mint Mobile, their favorite word is no. No contracts, no monthly bills, no hidden fees. Plans start at $15 a month. Make the switch at mintmobile.com/switch. That's mintmobile.com/switch. Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month 5 gigabyte plan required, equivalent to $15 a month. New customer offer for first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details.
This message comes from Bombas. Treat your feet right this season with merino wool, cashmere, long staple cotton, and more. Premium materials, better basics. Visit bombas.com/NPR and use code NPR for 20% off your first order.